So good morning, Sir Kaloy. I hope you're having a good day today. And thank you for agreeing to speak to us and sharing your thoughts today, coming from the JG Summit Group's vision and with your prior experience with all the leading multinationals. It's really it would be great to hear your thoughts on how we are evolving today. So thank you for your time. I'd like to actually step back to before the pre-COVID times. And start looking at JG Summit as a group and how their digital transformation vision has evolved. I'm sure they were pioneers even before all the pandemic started. Can you share a little bit about that?
So I'll probably put it into three stages. The first one is probably prior to 2018, not just because I came into the role by that time, and then from 2018 to prior to the pandemic, and then now during the pandemic, right? So I'll start in how they look at technology even before I came in. And I would say that JG Summit, when it came in, I was pretty surprised that prior to even 2018, even as far back as 2010, they've actually been investing in technology. They've also started working in outsourcing. They implemented their ERP. They moved out from their old one. So they had really a technology approach because of the leadership of some of the key family members. And the difference was that they were a little bit more conservative in terms of really trying to make sure that the investments in technology, which are quite huge, indeed space out. Then when I came in 2018, I think that's where also, luckily, my CEO, Lance, also put into the map the digital transformation is one of the main strategic advantage of the conglomerate. So I rode that wave, and in riding that wave, that allowed me to be able to fast track a lot of the things, from doing a lot more in the cloud, enabling digital workplace, looking at different ways or models to run operations, and eventually, of course, trying to do a lot more partnerships. Then this pandemic probably, I would say, exponentially increased that. So you had probably 2 years of trying to see we can do things. Now you're looking at months to be able to deliver things. So in terms of also JG Summit, the amount of intense pressure to be able to now digitize is probably exponentially increasing across all business units during this pandemic. That's how I would look at evolution from a time being conservative to a little bit more aggressive, and now super aggressive in transforming digitally the company.
I think based on the interactions that we've had with your leadership and yourself, I think JG Summit has always had a very strategic view of digital transformation, and we've seen that this is completely business driven. What is the return on investment? These are very strong questions. And every time I think you've made very strategic decisions, it's also been, what is my roadmap? How am I going to evolve beyond that, right? Can you share a little bit about what is shaping this thinking in the group?
One of the things different probably I realize from a multinational probably to a family owned, right, is that whatever happens, the family will be there. So you're looking really very much long term. In multinational, though you have roadmaps, you still look at the leadership to be not forever going to be there. Like next generation, my son will be the CEO. But here, you really look long term. So when you now look at that perspective, quite different from other companies, you tend to actually look at it from having really clear roadmaps of what is this, not now, not even 1 year, but what's your 5-year look on this space? Because they also have the patience and the direction strategically that they know the investment will have to pay off not only one time, but ongoing. And that will translate as well in the IT investment space. Because typically now you ask the question, is this something just for this 6 months, or you're looking at getting a return on this for the next 5-10 years, or at least shorter for some platforms? So this is very, very key for us to be able to have, moving forward, that type of discussions. And the company has evolved to actually being more to that, strategically looking at long-term investments driven by the way a family-owned corporation, actually a conglomerate, really works compared to a typical MNC.
How would you describe your role before the pandemic started as a group CIO for enabling this digital transformation? How do you see your role?
If you're asking more prior to the pandemic,
Prior,
When I
yeah,
came
yeah.
in, it was really focused more on leveraging scale. There was some agility, or
Okay.
in terms of being able to be fast, there was indeed that need, but it was really driven more for us to drive scale, right? Because the beauty of having a group that actually owns several key technologies, you can imagine the benefit of doing multiple platforms or single platform across multiple business units. And that has driven really my intent for the past 2 years of all my areas being able to scale, standardize, and being able to make sure that we maximize the benefit of JG. Right now, that hasn't changed. If you now go into the pandemic, it hasn't changed.
Yes, yes.
It actually is more accelerated because now investments that we are looking at in creating our own API marketplaces, looking at our own RPA, Center of Excellence, using DevOps, using Agile, things that we were looking at to probably do in 2021 or 22 now is actually something I'm doing now, right? Because that has
Bringing
changed in
forward.
terms of really the pace. But the discipline to still be able to do things right, the discipline to be able to do architecture the right way doesn't change. This is the pace really is increasing demand due to the needs of the company, to the effects of the pandemic.
So in a way, you're saying that your role, you are actually helping to accelerate digital transformation now that we are in the pandemic times, and the group is really looking to take advantage of
Yes.
this disruption to do, and you are playing a key role. What are some of the issues that you faced? I mean, it's now 4 to 5 months since we started. Can you describe the role of your own evolution from 4 months back to now?
The main challenge I would see is we've also more or less worked from home. That's one, right? From a the
Yeah,
ways of working has been quite different. Um,
yeah,
for those who know me, I'm very personal. So this virtual thing took an adjustment for me to be able to manage it.
absolutely.
I've expanded my group, taking corporate services to about now 800, and you know that I want to feel them and see them, right? That's the first adjustment. How to really do things permanently virtually, right? For the past 6 months
Mhm.
at the latest, right? So that's the first adjustment. The second adjustment actually was quite interesting is how do I now make sure that I don't make a mistake in terms of digital? Because everyone now, I think you would notice, I believe, that everyone thinks they're digital. So everyone has a say, right? I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do that. Now I need it. They make a joke, COVID make digital transformation faster or enable it. It's partly true, because now they see that they have to adjust. And as a CIO, you now have to make sure that you still have the right security controls architecture in place to make it happen and the right partnerships and organizations to work with. That level of deliberate intent is something that I have to be more vigilant now compared to before, given you have more on your plate, right? But the good thing about it is that you take that advantage of the momentum of the digital momentum of the SBUs or strategic business units in our group to be able now to drive a lot more change because they're open, right? So you can
Right.
always look at it as a negative that there's too many, but I use it as an opportunity to say now they're open to invest because they see they need to, because this has forced some of our businesses to really think on how we'll be able to meet our customer-centric demands that we have.
Is there a technique or a tip that you use to bring method to this
Uh,
madness with
yeah,
multiple demands?
you always look at the big rock concept. I think that's something that I inherited where you really focus on stepping back. What are really your big strategic things that you want to do? What are you willing to drive, right? Um, I also am the type of person, one of my mentors said before that at a level you have to go high or deep depending on the situation, right? And you still have to make sure you're strategic. What are the things you want to drive? But at the same time, be able to actually work on some key things. And the balance is being able to make sure that you have basically strategic intent that you try to really drive on your own. And if need be, if you really want to deep dive on some areas, but making sure that you have actually built the capability. And the good thing about it, I would say, is that my leadership team for the past 2 years has been very stable, and they have actually know already the ways of working and have now very clear intent in terms of what they have to do. So I now really focus strategically on really key projects, and then for them, for the other areas, I just monitor them in terms of scorecards and operational results. So that's really the technique of being able to focus. What are your key things that you have to drive? Then enable your people now to take care of the rest. But if you need to go down, you have to make sure they have ability to be able to go down to understand the issues or anything you have to work on.
We were talking about how do you balance and between and bring method to the madness. Now, this is, I mean, digital transformation is now a board level agenda, right?
Yes.
At the same time, you are diving into the details to look at each of the business's needs and how do you actually make sure there's a discipline in executing the board level agenda, right? And that's a huge bridge that you are doing as a CIO. Did I summarize that right?
Yes.
And how would you advise other CIOs to handle this bridge in today's times?
I think the key is really being able to strategically understand what your business really needs. What is the story behind the story, right? Because people would want to digitize and you ask why. Then you eventually realize, is it because of a particular need or because you want technology to be cool, right? Because everyone can go into a cool technology, but you have to understand the story behind the story and then engage on that why rather than the what. Because for me, as a CIO, you have to bridge between IT and the business. So what exactly does the business want, but really more the why of it? Because once you're clear on the why, it will drive the what, and the how, they should give it to you, right? Then the rest of the other things in terms of managing the other items of doing deep dive, really the key is for you to enable your people to have the capability. Invest on that. And I think that's the key thing that, frankly speaking, I was able to invest in preparation for this pandemic of making sure you have a leadership team. And the word that often not used properly is the word leadership team. So for the CIOs, there are some groups they call it management committee, some center of excellence. I would really suggest keeping the word leadership team because the leadership is what you really want to have, where leaders really drive also their people on a particular goal, drive it, set it in some cases, and then be able now to deliver the results. And if you have a very strong leadership team in your group, that will also allow you to be able to focus more managing the business, understanding their needs, the whys, and eventually be able to deliver results as well.
You mentioned about people capability. And I know one of the mission of DG Summit is also to increase the capability in the citizens of the country as well. But coming to your employees and especially in terms of technology, are you embarking on in any special initiatives in building the capability and the skills of the teams?
So a good point you raised, and actually this pandemic made people realize that in terms of the new ways of working, both from a process point of view and from a technology point of view, we have to, in the 1980s, called turbo boost our plan, right? So we've actually created and merged even with the DTO to drive a lot of things from a new ways of working, looking at agile, lean, looking at design thinking, to really make sure we actually meet the customer-centric demands. And then complement that with the digital tools. So we have a massive work in terms of looking at productivity tools that we have to drive their productivity, and then even invigorating or engaging more in areas of technology in ERP, in security, in network, or even in our different technical areas in operations and projects. That has actually resulted to a lot more discussions in terms of how we want to move forward for capability, and that's also accelerated during this time.
The pandemic and the new ways of working is here to stay. So I think if you are embarking on looking at what are the skills required to stay in the game for the next many months, and we don't know the end of this, I think you are absolutely enabling your organization to not just survive, but tap on the opportunities that will come during these times. So thank you for that. Just want to move a little bit towards partnerships. And I'm sure as a large corporation, the transformation, you work with a multitude of partners. What is your strategy? How do you pick your partners, and what's your philosophy in working with partners?
A good question, Andal. And you guys are one of my partners, right? So I look at three areas why I really heavily invested when I came in partners. And And there are three main reasons, and I call it the three C's. One is the be able to have more capability, right? Capability allows you, because with partners, you have a very limited set of expertise in your group. You cannot hire forever every new technology. You can't do that. And I realize if I want to expedite my digital transformation, I myself have to accept the fact that I don't have all the capability. And I have to engage with partners to be able to get that capability into my organization. The second is capacity. And capacity means I might have the technology knowledge, but if I don't have enough people to do it in the time the business needs it, how can I do it myself, right? Even if you have all the money, you cannot hire everyone that you need, right, to run your everything operations and projects. So capability and capacity were the first two. But the third thing I also looked at that people got surprised, and even now people get surprised in terms of the cost part, because even in terms of cost, it allows you a lot of flexibility. It allows you a lot, in some cases, cheaper than if you do it yourself. And that's the third C in terms of my three C's in why I partnered. But I have to step back and understand the word partnership as well. And a lot of people I work in IT look at supplier vendor. And I think we have to move away from that as CIOs. When you're partners, you look at win-win. And win-win means that you both gain from that particular engagement or project, that both companies actually get a benefit of it. It's not a lose win win lose. And engagement means
Yeah.
that you're talking with people that talk your language, be able to understand your needs, and be able to really have ways to work together to either drive more stronger projects or even innovation. And last but not least on my strategy, I don't want to partner with everyone because I cannot do that. I'll be probably lying if I say I want to partner with 50 companies. I don't think that's feasible. In the IT space, I can live with probably close to about 7 to 8 strategic partners in my domain. And then the rest, I would have to say, I still work with them, but I cannot have the same type of engagement of dealing with quarterly top to top management, engaging, looking at innovation, if I do it with everyone. So I think the key thing is also as a CIO, you have to select where areas that you own and select in terms of how you go about which particular partners you would really want to invest on. This is an investment. It's not like a one time I sign a document and that's it. So that would be how I approach partnership. And I think coming in from 2018 to now, even in the industry, they realize that JG Summit is open for business in terms of how we do the work. And for us, that we're open for partnerships if you are willing to be a partner and not just be a vendor in terms of our journey. So that's how I would have approached it for the past 2 years and continue to do so as part of my role.
And thank you. And I think we've been, at the receiving or the beneficiary of this philosophy of yours. And so many times that we have seen that, we've come together and literally put our stakes together for the success that we've got. And I think some of these successes have also been vested during the last 4 months, where remote working has been absolutely difficult. And we can't help it. It has got to evolve. And you've had a number of successful go lives or milestones that you achieved as a group. What would you reflect back and say as some of the things that you look at Infosys in particular as a partner?
There are two I would call out, right? One is in terms of our data center journey. Infosys actually publicly, of course, has been announced that they won our bid last year. And they've been able to manage our operations for our centralized infrastructure pretty well since January of this year. It's a big transition, meaning from one partner to the other on a very large scale with, I would say, I don't know if it's right, but probably tens of thousands at least devices and things to make sure everything works, right? So for the past 9 months, we've been working with you guys in terms of being able to make successful. I believe from where we wanted to be, we're there. There's some things we could, of course, evolve to, but kudos that there's no major thing that happened in the transition and up to now, knock on wood. But the second thing as well, during the pandemic, as you said, we never stopped work. And one of the things we continued was even our ERP journey with you. So we implemented our SAP systems for holding companies and now for the shared services that I took over in July 1 prior to even launching the project, that we're able to go live with zero critical issues on day one up until probably we closed it. And as a testament to the hard work of a partnership between yourself from Infosys and ours for the people, because it actually runs smack into the pandemic discussion where I still remember when we kicked it off, everything was like hallelujah, everything will see each other. We're gonna have very smooth sailing. That was, I think, we kick off December or November. Then the pandemic started to give us some hints. And in March, okay, no one can travel. You have to stay there. You're not able to meet anyone. And frankly speaking, if you look back, we're still able to finish, right? On time. So I think it's a remarkable feat where that partnership also helped in terms of being able to have a very good discussion, of being able to understand what is the need, adjust, flexible, both sides, to be able to really look at the strategic intent of being able to deliver our ERP Wave 1, as we call it in JG, in 1st of July. So thanks for Infosys as well for helping us out there.
And thanks so much, sir, for the partnership. And if I look back in the February, March times, I think even when some of our employees were there, your concern was more for our employees' welfare than just put your go lives and milestones in the front. So I really appreciate the philosophy of your personal philosophy and your group's philosophy in this partnership project. So thank you so much for that. The pandemic is here to stay, and we don't know how long. We don't know when we will get back to normal. And I think it's really encouraging to see. I've seen you plan in such a way that, look, we shouldn't plan as if it's going to end tomorrow and 2 months from now. We should plan for a scenario if this can actually continue. And then, of course, if things go for the better, it's great for us, right? We can course correct. Now, is that a valuable tip that you would like to pass on to CIOs that work with you to keep that horizon in mind?
That would be my suggestion. Where, given the uncertainty, it's a VUCA world, right? And people use the VUCA often. If you try to always work on the uncertainty and say it might be next week, it might be next month, this whole thing, no one really knows, right? Depends who you ask, will give you a different number. My suggestion really is for you to look at probably making a stake on the ground and saying, with all the probabilities, this might be earlier, this might be later, but I believe at this point I'm comfortable with this and let's plan against that. Your people will also benefit from it because if you tend to do all scenario plannings and change every now and then it becomes a different issue. In most cases, if you plan correctly, the only thing it can actually get worse, quote unquote, is actually it gets better faster. And if it gets better faster, that's very easier. It's easier, much easier to adjust. But if you do the other way around and say, I'm optimistic by January 2021, right? Everything will be normal. I can travel, you and I can sit face to face and have dinner if we wanted to, and no more masks, no more face shields in the Philippines, for example. Then it happens to be a 2022 number. Then you end up, okay, what do we do now? So my suggestion really be more pragmatic of looking at, I wouldn't say worst scenario of saying 2023, but probably look at around you and probably plan against already some realistic estimates that are more bordering to more less optimistic if possible. So it's easier for you to adjust later on if it gets better rather than the other way around. One of the things that we've now created are two interventions. One, in business units, we've actually created the concept of digital council. I'll give you the fact of the manufacturing piece, for example. In a manufacturing environment, you do have a lot of different stakeholders. And I've actually created the framework where you look at the framework, looking at your customers, your consumers, your employees, and your internal operations. And during this particular time, all of those stakeholders tend to actually want to create a digitizing everything, right? And one way to be able to engage with the business is to create a digital council where the business leaders are the one talking, understanding, to my point a while ago, the story behind the story. What do you really want to do and why? And then later on, now as you as IT professionals or CIOs engage in, I think the best way to be able to meet your why, to get your what is via this process, via this technology. And now your digital council will be the one to prioritize your projects for you. That's really one of my intent. Because if I prioritize and imagine you have different senior vice presidents at each and every level, you have to please them. Then my methodology was let them discuss and prioritize themselves. And I don't have to anymore argue or debate or favorite from one group, but they themselves decide with the help of the CEOs. Likewise, we've also now been able to mandate offer different business units to also now apply the concept of roadmaps. So we are in the process of creating digital roadmaps for each of our different business units, to be able to drive what's their agenda for the next 3 or 5 years, working against their own objectives and measures. I think it's very clear that every CIO should have a digital roadmap for their areas. For me, also, each of different business units, which are distinct by nature, will have to also define that so I can support them centrally, or even their local IT that also functionally reports to me can also support them on their journey. But establishing really a clear prioritization via a roadmap, via probably a council of digital people, digital business owners, will drive that clear clarity of driving what are the key priorities of digital transformation that you need to do. Because again, at the end of the day, you will have a gazillion number of requests, and you'll have limited manpower, limited costs, and money for you. And you have to have someone to almost funnel that. And that's for me works very well because I don't have to be involved in which one's better, but they themselves figure out and they themselves commit to both the roadmap and the priority, which now enables me to focus on execution.
So democracy with responsibility.
Yes.
That's a good one. Okay.
That's a very good way of placing it.
I also, I just want to go back to the one thing that you said. You were talking about during the pandemic times. There is so many requests that is coming from the businesses.
Yep.
And yes, this is digital council is one way of enabling them to prioritize. But from a technology or expertise point of view, you also need to make sure that you get the architectures or the security around your multitude of initiatives right. How do you go about that?
The hardest one challenges because, as I mentioned, everyone now becomes digital, right? Even an employee wants to have probably all the digital capabilities, right? And that's where you, as a steward of the function or your role, has to be more, I wouldn't say aggressive, but more deliberate and determined on three areas. You mentioned about architecture. You don't want to come back after this pandemic, after a year, saying, I made an investment that eventually no one will use because it doesn't fit in the overall direction of the company. It's so hard to maintain. We didn't maximize our technology, or it doesn't even make sense. That's the first thing you have to make sure that your architecture is still not going to be spaghetti afterwards, but still something you can draw and clearly be able to draw lines even after this pandemic is finished. That you weren't in the mood that just accept everything and hopefully everything becomes okay. The second, as you also mentioned, is security. That also worries me a little bit in this whole pandemic one. And I think a lot of people have called that out, especially in the IT profession. People, of course, are more conscious, but our business partners may not always be the case. And to be fair, it's like me asking them to be more tech savvy, which I think is a good ask, but not really a requirement. And the key for us in IT or CIOs, I have a CISA still background or CSAT. That's why I have an auditor background. That security is something that I'm very deliberate against, especially now that a lot of them are more consumer facing. You tend to actually have more of that, and even your internal operations, because you now massively commit with a lot of transactions, a lot of threats are coming in. And lastly, I think from a key one to manage it, or this particular, I would say, organized chaos, is making sure that you have the right structure to support it later from a people point of view, right? Um, a lot of people think that once a project is finished, it's actually done and it will work marvelously forever and ever and nothing's gonna break. No issues. And therefore, why do I have to have support? It's so nice. It was created perfectly. There's requirements are complete. There's no application that I know, at least me, either enterprise or consumer grade, that never updated their own. Because if that's the case, it means that they've never evolved to meet the customer demands. And as the CIO also, you have to look at the operational structure for you to support all the new things that are coming in. all new technologies and be able to make sure that indeed you're still making and meeting all the demands of the business. If you don't look at architecture, security, and also operations, you tend to actually have a problem sooner or later. And that's something you want to avoid in your role as CIOs.
Everybody's trying to accelerate digital transformation. There's plenty of initiatives that everybody wants to take on, but you really need to have a good wrap around it. First of all, prioritize what's really important, which is where you're giving a bit more democracy by digital councils. But at the same time, from a CIO's point of view, you are bringing in governance around architecture, security, as well as operational structure continued. So I think that is a great combo. Otherwise, I think people would run the risk of after 1 year, what did I do over the last 1 year?
Actually, it might be a good case study after all this pandemic and give 6 months. How many wasted IT investments are now in the system because of the pandemic? It might be a good research study. And I wouldn't be surprised that after 6 months or a year after the pandemic normalizes, that there'll probably be billions of dollars of waste because they tend to were not looking at that framework of being able to understand more long-term and short-term.
Do you see more collaboration between the retailers, consumers, and the logistics players from a last mile delivery point of view, or do you think there is increased polarization? What trends do you see in our industry?
Personally, I think it's from a consumer lens. So let's look at it from a consumer lens. The consumer doesn't really anymore care who they talk to. I think that's for me one of the things, right? The consumer just cares to get his product on my doorstep, in some cases personalized, on the time I want it to be. Now, if you work backwards against that, that's a major challenge from a retailing, from a logistics, from a manufacturing, because the three things now have to work together seamlessly to support that. Right? And you can look at models of buying all three and making it one company, or you are the type of industry leader that wants to maximize existing partnerships already, where if you're not good in one area, why not partner? I think it's for us, it's public that we actually also did some joint venture with DHL from a logistics front, because we also, similar to partnership, want to do capability building and capacity building, right? From a retailer point of view, to set up an e-commerce, or from a manufacturing to set up the whole supply chain or value stream for that area, we can opt actually to partner to make it faster, to experiment, and we've done that, or to also now look at that opportunity to see if you want to do your own, right? But I think from a perspective from us, we have to start from the consumer, customer-centric point of view, and now look at your landscape. Can you really stand alone? Or you have to now buy or partner to be able to make it quicker, because it's one area the consumer, and correct me if I'm wrong, will not wait, right? They'll find
Definitely
other
not, yeah.
Right? They say that brand loyalty, they wouldn't say it's gone, but it's less, right? And therefore, I think when brand loyalty becomes from a consumer product, or from in any area retail, it becomes less and less, right? Then it's more like speed to market or speed to me. So it's the personalization is the important thing. Gone are the days that the consumer adjusts to you. The consumer now is the one that you have to adjust to, right? And that's a big challenge for those creating platforms that are more consumer facing. We're building right now a couple of them as we speak, to really make sure that you are able to cater to them, because that's where the demand is.
So as a group, you're embracing analytics
Yes.
quite strongly. You're venturing out into that, and you're also getting into partnerships. That's been your philosophy. So
yes,
okay.
Because I think, Andal, the key thing there is speed, right? Because you can also, for example, build your own. It's normal, right? The tendency be fast, either because you don't have technology available, you tend to build it, and the consumer can wait. Why not, right? I have no choice. But now, if you just if you set up and build the capability, yes, you can build capability. It'll take you years. By the time probably the consumer doesn't need the capability anymore, they probably would want to do something else, like probably by the time a different logistics way, right? I don't know if at one point you can already now do 3D printing of the actual thing you need instead of actually, and you just basically patent and design for you, right? So that could be one of the things that in the future can happen, and when that happens, you eventually be able to not meet the demands if you're not partnering pretty well.
So Kaloy, thank you so much for such an insightful sharing over the last, past hour, and I really don't know how the time flew so fast. Much appreciate you taking us through, the JG Summit Group's transformation philosophy and vision, how you have led from the front, both pre-COVID and during the pandemic times, and some of the innovative approaches that you have held on, your philosophy around strategic partnership, as well as your insights on the region and our industry. So really appreciate all your insights. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you.
So thank you as well, Andal, for the opportunity to share my thoughts. Hopefully, for those that will be listening in or viewing, they can pick up a few tidbits of good advice as they move forward in terms of the role. So thank you again for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.